They breasted a gentle rise, and there was Gatlin below them, all 3 blocks of it, looking like a set from a movie about the Depression. "There'll be a constable," Bert said, and wondered why the sight of that hick one-ton table town dozing in the sun should have brought a lump of dread into his throat. They passed a speed sign proclaiming that no more than 30 was now in order, and another sign, rust-flecked, which said, "You are now entering Gatlin, nicest little town in Nebraska or anywhere else. Population 4,531. Dusty elms stood on both sides of the road, most of them diseased. They passed the Gatlin lumber yard and a 76 gas station, where the price signs swung slowly in a hot noon breeze. Regular 35.9, high test 38.9, and another which said, "Hi, truckers, diesel fuel around back." They crossed Elm Street, then Birch Street, and came up on the town square. The houses lining the streets were plain wood with screened porches, angular and functional. The lawns were yellow and dispirited. Up ahead, a mongrel dog walked slowly out into the middle of Maple Street, stood looking at them for a moment, and then lay down in the road with its nose on its paws. "Stop," Vicky said. "Stop right here." Bert pulled obediently to the curb. "Turn around. Let's take the body to Grand Island. That's not too far, is it? Let's do that." "Vicky, what's wrong?" "What do you mean? What's wrong?" she asked, her voice rising thinly. "This town is empty, Bert. There's nobody here but us. Can't you feel that?" He had felt something, and still felt it, but "It just seems that way," he said. "But it sure is a one-hydrant town. Probably all up in the square having a bake sale or a bingo game." "There's no one here." She said the words with a queer, strained emphasis. "Didn't you see that 76 station back there?" "Sure, by the lumberyard." "So what?" His mind was elsewhere, listening to the dull buzz of a cicada burrowing into one of the nearby elms. He could smell corn, dusty roses, and fertilizer, of course. For the first time they were off the turnpike and in a town in a state he had never been in before, although he had flown over it from time to time in United Airlines 747s, and somehow it felt all wrong, but all right. Somewhere up ahead there would be a drugstore with a soda fountain, a movie house named the Bijou, a school named after JFK. Bert, the prices said $35.9 for regular and $38.9 for high octane. Now, how long has it been since anyone in this country paid those prices?" "At least 4 years. He admitted. "But Vicky—" "We're right in town, Bert, and there's not a car. Not one car." "Grand Island is 70 miles away. It would look funny if we took him there." "I don't care." "Look, let's just drive up to the courthouse and—" "No!" "There, damn it, there. Why our marriage is falling apart in a nutshell. No, I won't. No, sir. And furthermore, I'll hold my breath till I turn blue if you don't let me have my way. Vicky, he said. I want to get out of here, Bert. Vicky, listen to me. Turn around. Let's go. Vicky, will you stop a minute? I'll stop when we're driving the other way. Now let's go. We have a dead child in the trunk of our car, he roared at her, and took a distinct pleasure at the way she flinched, the way her face crumbled. In a slightly lower voice, he went on. His throat was cut, and he was shoved out into the road, and I ran him over. Now, I'm going to drive up to the courthouse, or whatever they have here, and I'm going to report it. If you want to start walking towards the pike, go to it. I'll pick you up. But don't you tell me to turn around and drive 70 miles to Grand Island like we had nothing in the trunk but a bag of garbage. He happens to be some mother's son, and I'm going to report it before whoever killed him gets over the hills and far away. You bastard! She said, crying. What am I doing with you? I don't know, he said. I don't know anymore, but the situation can be remedied, Vicky. He pulled away from the curb. The dog lifted its head at the brief squeal of the tires, and then lowered it to its paws again. They drove the remaining block to the square. At the corner of Main and Pleasant, Main Street split in two. There actually was a town square, a grassy park with a bandstand in the middle. On the other end, where Main Street became one again, there were two official-looking buildings. Bert could make out the lettering on one. Gatlin Municipal Center. That's it, he said. Vicky said nothing. Halfway up the square, Bert pulled over again. They were beside a lunchroom, the Gatlin Bar and Grill. Where are you going? Vicky asked with alarm as he opened the door. To find out where everyone is. Sign in the window there says open. You're not going to leave me here alone. So come, who's stopping you? She unlocked her door and stepped out as he crossed in front of the car. He saw how pale her face was and felt an instant of pity. Hopeless pity. Do you hear it? She asked as he joined her. Hear what? The nothing. No cars, no people, no tractors, nothing. And then, from a block over, they heard the high and joined her. Hear what? The nothing. No cars, no people, no tractors, nothing. And then, from a block over, they heard the high and joyous laughter of children. I hear kids, he said. Don't you? She looked at him, troubled. He opened the lunchroom door and stepped into dry antiseptic heat. The floor was dusty. The sheen on the chrome was dull. The wooden blades of the ceiling fans stood still. Empty tables. Empty counter stools. But the mirror behind the counter had been shattered, and there was something else. In a moment he had it. All the beer taps had been broken off. They lay along the counter like bizarre party favors. Vicky's voice was gay and near to breaking. "Sure, ask anybody. Pardon me, sir, but could you tell me—" "Oh, shut up." But his voice was dull and without force. They were standing in a bar of dusty sunlight that fell through the lunchroom's big plate glass window, and again he had that feeling of being watched. And he thought of the boy they had in their trunk, and of the high laughter of children. A phrase came to him for no reason, a legal-sounding phrase, and it began to repeat mystically in his mind. Sight unseen, sight unseen, sight unseen. His eyes traveled over the age-yellowed cards thumb-tacked up behind the counter. Cheeseburg, 35 cents. World's Best Joe, 10 cents. Strawberry rhubarb pie, 25 cents. Today's special, ham and red-eye gravy with mashed potatoes, 80 cents. How long since he had seen lunchroom prices like that? Vicky had the answer. "Look at this," she said shrilly. She was pointing at the calendar on the wall. "They've been at that bean supper for 12 years, I guess." She uttered a grinding laugh. He walked over. The picture showed two boys swimming in a pond while a cute little dog carried off their clothes. Behind the picture was the legend, "Compliments of Gatlin Lumber and Hardware. You break 'em, we fix 'em." The month on view was August 1964. "I don't understand," he faltered. "But I'm sure—" "You're sure?" she cried hysterically. "Sure, you're sure? That's part of your trouble, Bert. You spent your whole life being sure." He turned back to the door, and she came after him. "Where are you going?" "To the municipal center." "Bert, why do you have to be so stubborn? You don't... Something's wrong here. Can't you just admit it?" "I'm not being stubborn. I just want to get shut of what's in that trunk." They stepped out onto the sidewalk, and Bert was struck afresh with the town's silence and with the smell of fertilizer. Somehow, you never thought of that smell when you buttered an ear and salted it and bit in. Compliments of sun rain and all sorts of man-made phosphates and a good healthy dose of cow shit. But somehow, this smell was different from the one he had grown up with in rural upstate New York. You could say whatever you wanted about organic fertilizer, but there was something almost fragrant about it when the spreader was laying it down in the fields. Not one of your great perfumes, God, no, but when the late afternoon spring breeze would pick up and waft it over the freshly turned fields, it was a smell with good associations. It meant winter was over for good. It meant that school doors were going to bang closed in 6 weeks or so and spill everyone out into summer. It was a smell tied irrevocably in his mind with other aromas that were perfume: timothy grass, clover, fresh earth, hollyhocks, dogwood. But they must do something different out here. He thought. The smell was close, but not the same. There was a sickish, sweet undertone, almost a death smell. As a medical orderly in Vietnam, he had become well versed in that smell. Vicky was sitting quietly in the car, holding the corn crucifix in her lap and staring at it in a rapt way Bert didn't like. "Put that thing down," he said. "No," she said without looking up. "You play your games and I'll play mine." He put the car in gear and drove up to the corner. A dead stoplight hung overhead, swinging in a faint breeze. To the left was a neat white church. The grass was cut. Neatly kept flowers grew beside the flagged path up to the door. Bert pulled over. "What are you doing?" "I'm gonna go in and take a look," Bert said. "It's the only place in town that looks as if there isn't 10 years' dust on it. And look at that sermon board." She looked. Neatly pegged white letters under glass read, "The power and grace of he who walks behind the rose." The date was 27 July 1976, the Sunday before. "He who walks behind the rose," Bert said, turning off the ignition. One of the 9,000 names of God only used in Nebraska, I guess. "Coming?" She didn't smile. "I'm not going with you." "Fine, whatever you want." "I haven't been in a church since I left home, and I don't want to be in this church, and I don't want to be in this town, Bert. I'm scared out of my mind. Can't we just go?" "I'll only be a minute." "I've got my keys, Bert. If you're not back in 5 minutes, I'll just drive away and leave you here." "Now, just wait a minute, lady." "That's what I'm gonna do, unless you want to assault me like a common mugger and take my keys. I suppose you could do that." "But you don't think I will?" "No." Her purse was on the seat between them. He snatched it up. She screamed and grabbed for the shoulder strap. He pulled it out of her reach. Not bothering to dig, he simply turned the bag upside down and let everything fall out. Her key ring glittered amid tissues, cosmetics, change, old shopping lists. She lunged for it, but he beat her again and put the keys in his own pocket. "You didn't have to do that," she said, crying. "Give them to me." "No," he said, and gave her a hard, meaningless grin. "No way." "Oh, please, Bert, I'm scared." She held her hand out, pleading now. "You'd wait 2 minutes and decide that was long enough." "I wouldn't." "And then you'd drive off laughing and saying to yourself, 'That'll teach Bert to cross me when I want something.' Hasn't that pretty much been your motto during our married life? 'That'll teach Bert to cross me.'" He got out of the car. "Please, Bert," she screamed, sliding across the seat. "Listen, I know. We'll drive out of town and call from a phone booth, okay? I've got all kinds of change. We can't... Don't leave me alone, Bert. Don't leave me out here alone." He slammed the door on her cry, and then leaned against the side of the T-bird for a moment, thumbs against his closed eyes. She was pounding on the driver's side window and calling his name. She was going to make a wonderful impression when he finally found someone in authority to take charge of the kid's body. Oh, yes. He turned and walked up the flagstone path to the church doors. 2 or 3 minutes just to look around, and he'd be back out. Probably the door wasn't even unlocked. But it pushed in easily on silent, well-oiled hinges. Reverently oiled, he thought, and that seemed funny for no really good reason. And he stepped into a vestibule so cool it was almost chilly. It took his eyes a moment to adjust to the dimness. The first thing he noticed was a pile of wooden letters in the far corner, dusty and jumbled indifferently together. He went to them, curious. They looked as old and forgotten as the calendar in the bar and grill, unlike the rest of the vestibule, which was dust-free and tidy. The letters were about 2 feet high, obviously part of a set. He spread them out on the carpet. There were 18 of them, and shifted them around like anagrams. Hurt, bite, Crag, chap, CS. Nope. Crap, target, chibs, huck. That wasn't much good either, except for the CH in chibs. He quickly assembled the word church and was left looking at rap, taggart, sibs. Foolish. He was squatting here, playing idiot games with a bunch of letters, while Vicky was going nuts out in the car. He started to get up, and then saw it. He formed Baptist, leaving Rag-Ek, and by changing 2 letters, he had Grace. Grace Baptist Church. The letters must have been out front. They had taken them down and had thrown them indifferently in the corner, and the church had been painted since then, so that you couldn't even see where the letters had been. What? Why? Why? It wasn't the Grace Baptist Church anymore, that was why. So, what kind of church was it? For some reason, that question caused a trickle of fear, and he stood up quickly, dusting his fingers. So they had taken down a bunch of letters. So what? Maybe they had changed the place into Flip Wilson's Church of What's Happening Now. But what had happened then? He shook it off impatiently and went through the inner doors. Now he was standing at the back of the church itself, and as he looked towards the nave, he felt fear close around his heart and squeeze tightly. His breath drew in, loud in the pregnant silence of this place. The space behind the pulpit was dominated by a gigantic portrait of Christ, and Bert thought, if nothing else in this town gave Vicky the screaming memes, this would. The Christ was grinning, vulpine. His eyes were wide and staring, reminding Bert uneasily of Lon Chaney in The Phantom of the Opera. In each of the wide black pupils, someone, a sinner presumably, was drowning in a lake of fire. But the oddest thing was that this Christ had green hair, which on closer examination revealed itself to be a twining mass of early summer corn. The picture was crudely done, but effective. It looked like a comic strip mural done by a gifted child, an Old Testament Christ, or a pagan Christ that might slaughter his sheep for sacrifice instead of leading them. At the foot of the left-hand ranks of pews was a pipe organ, and Bert could not at first tell what was wrong with it. He walked down the left-hand aisle and saw with slowly dawning horror that the keys had been ripped up, the stops had been pulled out, and the pipes themselves filled with dry corn husks. Over the organ was a carefully lettered plaque which read, "Make no music except with human tongue, saith the Lord God." Vicky was right. Something was terribly wrong here. He debated going back to Vicky without exploring any further, just getting into the car and leaving town as quickly as possible, never mind the municipal building. But it grated on him. Tell the truth, he thought. You want to give her band $5,000 to work at before going back and admitting she was right. Start with. He'd go back in a minute or so. He walked towards the pulpit thinking, people must go through Gatlin all the time. There must be people in the neighboring towns who have friends and relatives here. The Nebraska SP must cruise through from time to time. And what about the power company? The stoplight had been dead. Surely they'd know if the power had been dead for 12 long years. Conclusion? What seemed to have happened in Gatlin was impossible. Still, he had the creeps. He climbed the fork carpeted steps to the pulpit and looked out over the deserted pews, glimmering in the half-shadows. He seemed to feel the weight of those eldritch and decidedly unchristian eyes boring into his back. There was a large Bible on the lectern, open to the 38th chapter of Job. Bert glanced down at it and read, "Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, and said, Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare, if thou hast understanding. The Lord, he who walks behind the rows. Declare if thou hast understanding, and please pass the corn." He fluttered the pages of the Bible, and they made a dry whispering sound in the quiet, the sound that ghosts might make, if there really were such things. And in a place like this, you could almost believe it. Sections of the Bible had been chopped out, mostly from the New Testament, he saw. Someone had decided to take on the job of amending good King James with a pair of scissors, but the Old Testament was intact. He was about to leave the pulpit when he saw another book on a lower shelf and took it out, thinking it might be a church record of weddings and confirmations and burials. He grimaced at the word stamped on the cover, done inexpertly in gold leaf. Thus let the iniquitous be cut down, so that the ground may be fertile again, saith the Lord God of hosts. There seemed to be one train of thought around here, and Bert didn't care much for the track it seemed to ride on. He opened the book to the first wide-lined sheet. A child had done the lettering he saw immediately. In places, an ink eraser had been carefully used, and while there were no misspellings, the letters were large and childishly made, drawn rather than written. The first column read, Amos Deegan Richard, born September 4th, 1945, September 4, 1964. Isaac Renfrew William, born September 19th, 1945, September 19th, 1964. Zebaniah Kirk George, born October 14th, 1945, October 14th, 1964. Mary Wells Roberta, born November 12th, 1945, November 12th, 1964. Yemen Hollis Edward, born January 5th, 1946, January 5th, 1965. Frowning, Bert continued to turn through the pages. 3/4 of the way through, the double columns ended abruptly. Rachel Stigman Donna, born June 21st, 1957, June 21st, 1976. Moses Richardson Henry, born July 29, 1957. Malachi Boardman Craig, born August 15th, 1957. The last entry in the book was for Ruth Clausen Sandra, born April 30th, 1961. Bert looked at the shelf where he had found this book and came up with 2 more. The first had the same iniquitous Be Cut Down logo, and it continued the same record, the single column tracing birth dates and names. In early September of 1964, he found Job Gilman Clayton, born September 6th, and the next entry was Eve Tobin, born June 16th, 1965, no second name in parentheses. The third book was blank. Standing behind the pulpit, Bert thought about it. Something had happened in 1964. Something to do with religion and corn and children. Dear God, we beg thy blessing on the crop, for Jesus' sake, amen. And the knife raised high to sacrifice the lamb. But had it been a lamb? Perhaps a religious mania had swept them, alone. All alone, cut off from the outside world by hundreds of square miles of the rustling secret corn, alone under 70 million acres of blue sky, alone under the watchful eye of God, now a strange green God, a God of corn, grown old and strange and hungry, he who walks behind the rows. Bert felt a chill creep into his flesh. Square miles of the rustling secret corn, alone under 70 million acres of blue sky, alone under the watchful eye of God, now a strange green god, a god of corn, grown old and strange and hungry, he who walks behind the rows. Bert felt a chill creep into his flesh.